Hello. I'm going to do some check-ins about some of the books that I have read. I did a terrible job of checking in as I finished things this month. There are about 8 days left in the month. I'm still actively reading books. I've read so many books this month, so many great books, but I'm going to share 3 to 5 a night when I get home from work with you. And so in order to catch up, I will do a better job in February, I hope, of keeping up with these, like recording when I finish a book instead of just waiting for them to all pile up and thinking, well, I'll do them later. So this month I'm going to do 3 to 5 a night for about 8 days when I get home from work, and hopefully I'll stick with that, and hopefully we'll get through reviews of all of the books. I'm really informal, just sitting on my couch right now. It's a little bit cold in here. Nights have been so cold, but no precipitation, weirdly, for where I live. And so no snow. And all I want is snow. I want snow days. I want to take Lola into the snow. Lola is chilling over there. But I'm going to talk about, in order, the books that I read. So the very first book that I read in the month of December, in the year of January, always feels in the year of January, in the month of December. What am I saying? Let me try that again. The very first book that I read in the month of January, in the year 2025. What am I saying? Okay, so the very first book I read this year was a reread, and it always feels like such an important thing, the first book of the year. I think I am a little bit superstitious about the first book of the year. I feel like it has to be a winner. I feel like it has to be good. I feel like it has to set the tone for all, or I feel like it will set the tone for all of the reading that I'm about to do in the year. So I'm always pretty careful about what the first book is. And this year I was uncertain. I had really high hopes of all of the new to me books that I had on my TBR. So many of them have turned out to be just exquisitely wonderful reads and experiences. I wasn't sure before I started reading them. Sometimes you know you're going to love a book, and most of the time you don't. So I went with a reread. And it was actually a book that wasn't on my TBR, but it was one that I was really just wanting to read. And when I saw Katie at Books and Things talk about her response to it and how it made it on one of her favorite reads of the year, because she had read it for the first time in 2024, that's all I needed. That's all I needed to go, you know what? This is going to be my first read of 2025. It's a reread, and I don't even care. So that is a book that I listened to while I worked on a Paint by Number, which was a gift from my sister for my birthday, which I'm still not finished with. It's so detailed, but I love it. I am having so much fun doing it. I just don't have as much time to give to it as I did in December. So in January, beginning of January. So I listened to it on audio, and what a delight that was It was so good. I think I've read it, like physically read it 15 times or so. And I've listened to it once before, but it was a different audio. And they said the main love interest, they said his name wrong in that book, in that audiobook. And I hated it so much. I found a different version at my library. My library now has 2 copies of it. One is that original version that I listened to several years ago. And one was this new version that I listened to, and it was wonderful. I don't even think I've told you what I listened to. I don't even think I told you what the name of the book is yet. This is why I don't generally record videos after work. Okay. I have high energy, low brain function. So, The Blue Castle. The Blue Castle is what I'm trying to talk about. I'll put a copy of it here, like a picture. This is my absolute favorite book. I know that I talked so much last year about Emily of New Moon because I did a reread, and I've just decided that later on this year, I'm going to do a reread of the whole Anne of Green Gables series, all 9 books. And I also have the Pat duology, Mistress Pat and Pat of Silverbush, sitting on my shelf over there on my TBR shelf. So I think I'm going to read a lot of Ellen Montgomery this year. And I hadn't originally planned on doing that, but I'm just feeling it. At least I'm feeling it right now. And I know that every time I finish one of her books, I'm like, oh, that was my favorite. But truly, The Blue Castle is my favorite. It is my hands down #1, beat them all. If I could only keep one Ellen Montgomery book and have to get rid of the rest of them, as much as I love some of them, it would be The Blue Castle. The Blue Castle is a standalone romance novel. It's definitely a romance novel, but it is more than a romance novel. It is the funniest of Ellen Montgomery's books by far. It's hilarious. In it, you have a character, a young 30s, but for the time period, old maid 30s, single woman named Valancy Sterling. And Valancy, she's had such a kind of like downtrodden life. She has been very sequestered in her life by the adult women around her. In their effort to control and to love her in their way, they have really squelched who she is as a human being and her dreams and her desires and her knowledge of herself. And she just feels like life is a misery. It's a dark, kind of dank, hopeless, hapless misery, and nothing works out for her. She is an old maid. She is never going to find love. She is never going to be able to make her own decisions. She's never going to be able to follow her own dreams and desires. She barely gets to choose her own reading material. Even so, she's not allowed to read fiction. She can only read these books about nature that are so beautifully, gorgeously written. So in this book, Ellen Montgomery really has the opportunity as well to give some, through excerpts from these books, to give some of her nature writing, which is just transportive. Like, it's so beautiful. And you have this character, Valancy, who has been having some heart pains, and so she goes to see a doctor. She doesn't want to go to the family doctor because she doesn't want him to tell the family what's going on with her. And so she goes to a different doctor, which is just, it's a risk. It's a risk because if her family finds out that she's gone to this other doctor, things are going to be bad. And just socially, like within her family, the consequences will be guilt and bemoaning and making her life just that much more miserable than it already is. And so she sneaks to see this other doctor, knowing that she's taking her peace into her own hands. And this doctor has he sees her, he examines her, and then there's an emergency and he runs off, leaving very, very quickly. He sends a letter to her to tell her the results of his exam. And in that letter, he says that she is lucky to be alive now, that she is on death's doorstep, that any kind of big shock could kill her. Any overexertion could kill her. Any like increase in her heart rate could kill her. And so she takes all this to heart. No pun intended. She takes all this to heart and decides to make some changes in her life. If she's going to die, then what do consequences matter? And so she decides that with whatever time she has left, she's going to live. She leaves. Well, she shocks her whole family by speaking her mind and telling them what she thinks of them in some of the funniest writing that I have ever read and will ever read. And then she decides that she is going to go take care of an old school friend who's sick and dying. She has tuberculosis. I don't know if they call it tuberculosis, but that's definitely what she has. And she's going to go take care of her while she's dying. But in order to do that, she has to live in a house with an unmarried man who is known all over town for driving fast, getting drunk, being wild. It's the old classmate's father. So remember, they're in their 30s. The classmate might be a little bit younger, but they're women, right? And she's going to go do this, and she's going to ruin her reputation. And just by associating with this person, it's just going to ruin everything. And they associate with a guy whose past is kind of unknown, but it's assumed that he's some sort of criminal hiding from the police, from the authorities. And so she's now hanging out with this kind of wild, rough crowd, except that they turn out to be just so wonderful. And her family doesn't understand what she's doing, and she is just going to make the best of her life. She's going to live as much of her life as she can before she dies. Of course, she falls in love, and the story is just glorious, glorious, glorious. If you want to laugh, if you want to cry, if you want to feel hope for the world, pick up The Blue Castle by Lucy Maud Montgomery. It is the perfect book to have read first thing at the start of the year. The next thing I also listened to was a novella that came in as a hold from my library. That was Haunt Sweet Home. I'm not remembering who the author is right now, but I'll put a picture of it here. This is a little novella. It did not take me long to listen to it all. I think I usually listen on 2 times speed or just slightly faster. And I think it took me about an hour and a half to listen to the whole thing. This was fun if you enjoy watching ghost hunting shows. Basic premise of this is that a girl who has a hard time holding down a job receives an offer from a family member, a cousin, I think, or an uncle, to work on the set of a TV show that does ghost hunting or spiritual hunting in homes that have just been purchased that people are going to move into. I think that's how it goes. And or home renovations or something. There's a home renovation moving aspect to it. And her job is to never be seen by the families that they're filming and to create the things that they say that they hear. So if they say they hear cows mooing in the middle of the night, but there are no cows around, it's her job to create cows mooing in the middle of the night in such a way that it seems realistic. It seems to be what they say they've heard, and they don't know that it's being created or manipulated or whatever. And it's supposed to scare them, and then they get footage. It's as she's doing this, like making things happen in the library, making sounds happen out in the middle of the woods, things like that. She runs into some people who are helping her, and she starts to notice that there are things happening that she doesn't have any say in or control over, things that she's not doing herself. And yeah, it gets weird. There's some backstory stuff about her. Yeah, it was okay. It was okay. It wasn't great. I think part of the reason why it wasn't great was because it was so short, so things didn't fully get developed. I think it was trying to be super clever, and it just felt a little overly done for what it was. Again, enjoyable. Would recommend to people who enjoy watching ghost hunting shows, because I think there's a lot of humor there for people who do. I do. I like watching them. But I think there's a lot of humor in it for people who are very familiar with ghost hunting shows in particular. If you don't watch them or enjoy them, this book may not have enough for you to really draw you in. And I think that's a shame, because I think the story actually had quite a lot of potential. I think it just needed more time. I think it should have been a fully developed novel that could have really knocked people's socks off, honestly. I think the writer is talented, but I think this story for a novella, it was too much for such a small space. Of course, now, take that with a grain of salt, because I famously do not enjoy short stories. Later on, you're going to hear about another novella I read this month that I just felt wasn't all that great. But mostly because of the length and the amount of impact that it's trying to pull off in such a short amount of time. And it just, long form is my form. Long form works for me. Give me a 1,000-page novel over a 60-page novella any day. So yeah, that it was fine, but I'm glad it wasn't my first read of the year, because that would have really bummed me out. My next one was a physical read. This was How to Walk Away by Katherine Center. I am reading a Katherine Center every month for the next 12 months, and I think that was the best decision I've made in a really long time, because Katherine Center's books just leave me feeling so warm and cozy and happy. I really, really love this. I had never read this before. She's got a bunch of books on her backlist that I've never read. I discovered her for myself, not last year, but the year before. And there's no turning back, friends. There's no turning back. She is a gift to me from the universe. It's a weird thing to say, but it's true. She is. And I loved this. This is about a woman. What's her name? Margaret Jacobson, aka Maggie. And when the book starts, she is apprehensively getting on a small aircraft with her fiance, Chip. Chip is getting his flying license, and he would really like to take her somewhere. At the beginning, he's not her fiance yet. That's why he wants to take her up into the plane, because he wants to fly over a certain coast, a certain beach, where he has carved into the sand or put rocks or something on the sand, asking her to marry him. But the thing is that when they get there, it's kind of stormy and she can't actually see it. So it's kind of a wasted trip anyway. And then on the return, the wind really wreaks havoc with the landing. They crash, and he is able to get out, but she can't get out. He's gonna go get help. It feels like it takes a really long time for them to get to her. She keeps telling, when they do get to her, well, the plane explodes. A wave of fire goes over her. When they get to her to get her out, when the medics get her out and get her to the hospital, she keeps telling them she feels fine. She's thinking very much about like continuing this celebration, because they did get engaged in the plane. And she didn't, they were in the plane, he was flying the plane, they were buckled in. He was a little bit concerned about the air and losing altitude and things. And they didn't get to celebrate that engagement. And a few hours later, obviously, things have changed. The shock and the adrenaline has worn off, and she has realized that actually she's paralyzed from the waist down. She eventually finds out, although they don't tell her directly for a long time, but she eventually finds out that she's got terrible burns all over her body. that the scarring may never go away. There are some parts of her body where they've had to replace the skin, and that will always be like dimpled and wavy. And she just, her whole life has changed. Her entire life has changed. And her fiance is nowhere to be seen. He does eventually show back up, but dude is weak. It's really weak. And she is going to have to go through physical therapy, trying to see, because sometimes you can get, sometimes with the injury she has, because she broke her back, and sometimes with the injury she has, you can get mobility back. And so they're trying to, she only has X number of days that the insurance will pay for. So they're trying to kind of fast track physical therapy and emotional therapy and healing and all of this. And she gets assigned just this really, really kind of rough and mean Scottish, of course, physical therapist. And he's rough, but he's got reasons to be rough. And she's rough. She's obviously got reasons to be rough. And together, they're just so sweet. It's just such a wonderful love story, but it's way more than a love story. It is this woman grappling with such heavy stuff, and it's funny, and it is sad, and it's hopeful and uplifting, and true to form. Katherine Center ends it so spot on well. I love Katherine Center's endings. She really, really writes some of the best endings for me that I've read. This was a huge win. I'm not kidding when I say that deciding to read a Katherine Center every month for a year is going to be just the best thing for me. I feel so good when I read her books. And they're not soft books. Like, she's dealing with really big topics, like a woman losing her mobility, her autonomy, her job. She was just about to get a new job. Her fiance, she just got engaged. Like, she's lost everything. She's lost everything. And she loses even more. I'm not telling you everything. She loses even more. And yet you're laughing through this book and crying happy tears. And it's just really inspiring and wonderful and lovely. And I'm really happy to be reading Katherine Center this year. So those are the 3 books I'm going to talk about today. I'll come back tomorrow with 3 more books, and we'll see what I have to say. It's kind of fun to do it this way. I'm not saying I'm going to do it this way every time. It's kind of fun to do it this way because it's been a good 20 plus days since I read these books, and it's interesting to see which ones are fresh in my mind, which ones stick in my mind super clearly. Literally just got home and thought I need to do this 3 books reviewed before I do anything else. So, well, I took care of Lola's needs, but other than that, I just got home. I'm going to talk quickly about 3 books that I read. I suppose, it's been a whole day for me, but it's been a couple of minutes for you, so I don't need to tell you what I'm doing. I have dog hair on my lip. I don't need to tell you what I'm doing. I'm just going to dive into this. I wore pink to school today because the high school is doing the high school version of Mean Girls the musical, and on Wednesdays, it's a Wednesday, we wear pink. So they did a little sneak preview performance today of one of the songs, and we were all encouraged to wear pink. So I wore pink today. Let's do this. The next book I read this month was Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors by Sonali Dev. Sonali Dev. And this book just hit the spot. I loved this book. I loved everything about this book. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but it's not a direct retelling of Pride and Prejudice. It's really its own story. It's just got inspiration from the dynamics in Pride and Prejudice. It uses some of the names, but really it's its own story. And I loved the way that the author develops the family culture, all this back history. Like, it talks about how they got their nicknames from a children's book. And I don't know, it's such good writing. It's so well developed. There's this whole storyline about a brother whose sister is an artist, and she has to have brain surgery, and she's going blind. And the brain surgeon is the same woman who he keeps running into, who keeps sticking her foot in everything. And they have a negative view of each other at the start. And of course, they have to learn who they truly are, like to see past those things that annoy them about each other. But, hi Lola. But it's such high stakes. Hello, Lola. Hello. Did you miss me today? Yeah. Did you miss me? That's very close, Lowe's. And you're changing the light as well. I don't know what she did, but she did something. I'm just gonna keep recording. There we go. That's slightly better. What was I saying? I don't know. I just loved the way that she tells this story. I love the way she develops the characters. I love the backstory that we get. It's a very complex and believable story. And yeah, I'm really looking forward. I'm glad that it's a series. I'm really looking forward to reading the next one. There's not just one story going on. There's multiple stories going on. And sometimes that annoys me, but they were so well told and so well connected that they were easy to follow. She's chewing up a box right now, if you hear any loud noises in the background. Loved it, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next one. This may be one of my favorite reads of the year. I'm not sure yet. I want to see how it like stays with me, but I think it really will stay with me. I then read a nonfiction. I read Awe, The Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life by Dacher Keltner. This was so fascinating. It gives you an understanding of the difference between awe and emotion and the purpose for both of them in the human life. It talks about 7 things that research has shown directly lead to awe. It talks about how awe affects us mentally, spiritually, emotionally. This author consulted on the first film of Inside Out. He thought he was going to go talk about emotions, but really they asked him all these psychological questions about what's going on when a person's feeling this way or thinking this way. It's a fascinating book. It's well written. Mostly. It gets a little bumpy when he goes into a deep dive into each of the 7 different ways that we experience awe, or the 7 different things that bring about awe. And I left this book kind of feeling like awe is the reason for living. It's life's purpose. And that's a really big statement, but it's a book that I wrote just so many quotes into my I've been doing really well with my Commonplace book. And I wrote so many quotes down and have just been kind of sitting with one each day, just kind of pondering it and thinking about it. It's something that's going to be, I think, pretty influential in the way that I make decisions and in the way that I try to experience things, or that I not try to experience things, but intentionally experience things. I loved it. I loved it a lot. It has given me a lot to think about. I often don't like nonfiction books like that. They sometimes feel kind of self-helpy, but this one has a lot of research. It has a good balance of research and explaining how this research was gathered. It is, of course, very narrative and almost anthropological in the way that the research was gathered, which I really jive with. I'm not all that big into numbers. And yeah, I don't know. I thought it was great. I thought it was really great. The next book I want to talk to you about is one that I listened to. It is a children's book, and that is Into the Uncut Grass. This was so good. This was so good. It's read by the author, obviously, and it is perfect for children and adults. It is a lot about understanding where people are coming from and finding common ground. It's about a little boy who doesn't want to make his bed, and instead of being curious and finding out why his mother always wants him to make his bed, he just refuses and runs away into the uncut grass. And when he's in the uncut grass, he runs into all kinds of different beings, like gnomes and things like that kind of give him some guidance and ask him some important questions that help him to see things a little bit differently. And his perspective changes, and he learns a lot of lessons that the adults who might be reading this book need to learn, as well as the children. It's a really, really great book. I did only listen to it, and I say it's a great listen, but I think that it would be a really wonderful book to give as a gift to families. It would be a really wonderful book to enjoy together as a read aloud. And I imagine that the pictures in it are quite sweet, just based on the cover. But it is also good just for a listen. It's a quick listen, 13, 14 minutes. But that is the next book I read. And that is my check-in for today. Very fast, very speedy, very efficient. I'm very hungry and tired. But at least I got to this today before the sun completely went down. We are, and I have 4 million books to do in sit down wrap up style. I did not do any in the moment recording of thoughts this month, but that's okay. I'm gonna quickly zoom my way through these in the order read, amazingly. Genuinely a million books. And then I'm going to edit this and I'm going to get it out today. So here we go. The next book that I need to tell you about that I read and loved was this first book in a duology. And I think there's a third book that's a set of short stories, which I will continue to read all of these. I love them. And I actually turned one of my students onto this. She's reading it right now, and she doesn't consider herself a romance or a fantasy reader, and she is loving this book. So this is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Yu Lin Tan. This is a YA romance fantasy about a young girl who is the daughter of the moon goddess, but the moon goddess is not supposed to have a daughter. And when it is found out that she exists, the moon goddess is in kind of like, she's under arrest, kind of, and they're gonna separate them. So she, with the help of a friend of the mother, is thrust to Earth, basically. But Earth is not necessarily what you might think Earth is, and it's the story of how she makes her way and how she needs to fight, monsters and herself and fear to help her mother, and also to protect a love interest that happens, to protect herself, just all sorts of greatness. Absolutely loved that book. Was totally taken by surprise by how much I loved it. Also read and loved another YA, which surprises me. This is a standalone. I tried to read this a long time ago and couldn't get into it. I don't think I understood what it was trying to do. And this time I read it and I was like, this is the most brilliant thing in the world. Maybe not in the world, but it's pretty brilliant. This is The Lovely War by Julie Berry. And I have been trying to read another book by Julie Berry during Middle Grade March for many years, and I just never get to her. So this ended up being my first Julie Berry book that I read, and I loved this. This is several stories going on at once. This is the story of people in Europe during the war, but it is also the story of Aphrodite on trial for having seemingly having an affair. She's on trial and her husband is the judge. And so she's having to defend her actions, and she defends her actions and her reasons based on her work. And her work, of course, is love. And so these are several love stories that are all interwoven together, and everything, including her trial, all come together in such a brilliant way. This is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. It's well written. It's fast paced. It's beautiful character development, beautiful setting development, beautiful world building. Loved this. Absolutely loved this. Then I read an inspector novel. And I generally, the only inspector, quote unquote, that I enjoy or have enjoyed, and I've tried many, is Miss Marple. But she's not really your typical, detective novel type of person. I did really enjoy my very first Sherlock Holmes read this winter. Back in October, I read my first Doyle. And really enjoyed that. And so I thought, okay, so maybe I'm changing, or maybe I just really kind of off center. Maybe I'm not a Poirot person, maybe I'm just not, interested in the typical detective. I've readjusted you, so I was tired of looking up. Maybe I'm just not interested in the typical detective, and I want something just a little bit different. And so I finally read the first Louise Penny, Still Life, the first book in the Inspector Gamache series. And this is a series for me. The writing in this book is so beautiful. The character development in this book is so beautiful. I was enjoying, there's philosophy in this book, there's everything. And I was enjoying my read of this so much, I wasn't even trying to figure out who done it, what was going on, what was actually the solution to the mystery. I was just enjoying the unfolding of a really well-told story that happened to be a mystery, that happened to, feature and showcase Inspector Gamache. And I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to read the next one in February. I then read this short novella by Anita Desai, and Anita Desai is one of the few truly literary fiction authors that I have enjoyed. I might have a one-off book that I enjoy that's literary here and there, but there's not really an author of literary fiction that I enjoy everything that they write. The story really has to get me for me to want to put the work in to get through all of the literary diversion. And so Anita Desai is one of those authors. I have generally enjoyed everything I have read by this author. Not this, though. And my major complaint about it is that it is a novella. It is less than a novella. It's a glorified short story. Like, this is it's a glorified novella. It is a short story. It's a very small little book, and there are very few words on every page. And so, although this comes in at close to 100 pages, it's at 96 pages, I would cut that in half. This is really just a long short story. We know how I feel about short stories. There's not enough there for me to get invested in anything, and this one covers a whole awful lot, but in a superficial way. Short stories almost always feel superficial to me. So I think that's why I like the Christmas short stories, because they aren't trying to be more than they are, right? I know what I'm getting, and they have an appropriate goal for what they're doing. I feel like most short stories don't have an appropriate goal for what they're trying to accomplish for the reader, and I just don't enjoy them all that much. I love Edgar Allan Poe short stories, and I love Christmas short stories, and that's about it. I can tolerate other short stories. So I was really excited about this when I thought it was a novel, and when it arrived, I was like, okay, but I love her writing, so I'm going to give this a try, and I read it, and then I really just didn't enjoy it all that much. Beautiful book, but I followed it up with one that I just knew I was going to love, and I wasn't wrong. I followed it up with the second book in the, what is it called? The Fair Mile series. This is Dark Tides by Philippa Gregory. This is the sequel, the second book in a trilogy. Well, currently it's a trilogy. Maybe she'll do another one. I don't know. Probably not. I think she does mostly trilogies. But this is the second book in the Fair Mile series. The first one was Tidelands. Loved Tidelands. Feels like a very different book from this one. In this one, a lot of time has passed, but we start with the same characters to kind of anchor us into the story. And those characters are going to be important throughout, but in very different ways than they were before. They're having a very different life than they were before. I can't tell you much about it, but I will say, because it's a follow-up to the second book, but I will say that we are in colonial America. We are in London. We are in Venice, Italy. And this book reads with more humor and more of an adventure feel than Tidelands. Tidelands was very serious historical fiction. And this one is very serious historical fiction, but the stuff that's happening in here is going to make you laugh out loud. Several times I was like, what? What just happened? Additionally, though, you have all of the Philippa Gregory things that you want. You have that character development. You have that rich language. You have that rich sense of place. You have the historical accuracy. I didn't know anything about Venice during this time, and I learned so much. It was fascinating. But you've also got characters doing dastardly deeds and people trying to stop them. You have a young girl going on a reconnaissance mission and falling in love and, risking her life for things that I can't tell you because it would ruin the story. It's so fast-paced, it's so much fun, and it's also all the things that Philippa Gregory already is. So this was a beautiful read. I do think that you can read this. I don't know if you'd have the same attachment to the characters, but I do think you can read this as a standalone if you want to, have a good time. Then I read, so I'm doing the 12 in 12 challenge again this year. I didn't make a big deal out of announcing that I was doing it this year because honestly, last year it didn't go so great for me. I didn't really enjoy any of the books, and that made me feel guilty, and I didn't want to tell my friends that I didn't like the books they told me to read for the most part. This year I asked for them for recommendations again, vowed to read them, and my first year I loved every book that I read so much. And I think that's going to be the case this year too. I'm really excited because the first one that was recommended to me was The Rent Collector by Cameron Wright. And I set myself up for this one. I was like, this is not the kind of book that I would normally pick. This is about people living in a trash heap. It's about a young mother and father and a baby. This is going to be sad. This is going to break my heart. I steer clear of those kinds of books. I want to read about human experience, all kinds of human experience. But when there is a child involved or an animal involved, I don't read it. But this was the first book that was recommended to me, and I went into this, very trepidatiously, and I ended up reading the entire thing in one sitting because I loved it so much. This is a book about redemption arcs. This is a book about beauty and squalor. This is a book about literature, literary analysis, the power of the written word, the power of story. This is just maybe one of the most beautiful books that I have ever read. It's not great writing. It's kind of clunky writing. The story will stay with me forever, will impact me, already impacts me, and the why of why I'm doing certain things with story for my students. Oh my word, I just loved this book so much, and I want to put it in the hands of everyone I know, but I know not everybody's gonna love it because you really have to go, this is a phenomenal story in a mediocre writing style, and you have to find the phenomenal in it. Accept it for what it is. I loved this book. This will be a favorite read of the year. Favorite reads of the year do not have to have great literary merit. This has heart and this has truth, and I highly recommend The Rent Collector by Cameron Wright. I then followed that up with The Stolen Queen by Fiona Davis. I love Fiona Davis. I read everything that she puts out. I usually pre-order it. I actually had this pre-ordered, but then I saw that it was a Book of the Month choice. Quickly canceled the pre-order, got it from Book of the Month just because it's cheaper. Got to be cost effective. But love Fiona Davis. The last few she's put out, the stories themselves haven't captured me that much. I still appreciate reading them. I still really enjoy them. I still always buy them. But it's been a while since one of her books really got me, and this one got me. This is, and that's surprising in and of itself though, because most of this is set in Egypt, not in New York, where she usually sets her books. There is a huge New York component here. There is an important component in New York, but mostly this takes place in Egypt. And I don't generally enjoy books that take place in Egypt. It's not like a buzzword locality for me. In fact, if I see something's written about Egypt or in Egypt, I just generally don't choose it. I'm not opposed to it, but it's not my go-to. It's not really an interest for me. This is mostly set in Egypt, and I loved this so much. I loved the setting. I loved the history. I loved the mystery. It's about two women, of course, and they're separated by time and space, but of course their lives are going to intertwine. Their stories are going to intertwine in ways that you will not be able to predict. All of the characters in this, usually I like one timeline better than the other, but in this, both timelines were so compelling, so well written. I absolutely loved this. This really, really, really got me. And this is the first one since I think The Doll's House by her that I've really loved. So it's been a number of years, like over a decade. I've read them all. I've enjoyed them all. But this one may be my favorite by her. It may be my favorite. This is, I know it's only the January wrap up, friends, but I already have a book that is in the running for best book of the year for me. I know I have a lot of books to come. It's a long year. A year is long. It's only been 31 out of 365 days, which means it's only been like 25 books out of the 200 I'll probably read this year. And I already feel like I have one that may be my favorite book of the year. And if I think back to last year, I found my two favorite books of the year very early on, within the first 6 months. One of which I read in March, the other in May. Okay? So when you know, right? This is definitely one of the contenders and that is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. He has so outdone himself with this one. Yeah, it's a horror story. Yeah, it's a social commentary. Yeah, it's got all those Southern vibes. Yeah, it's got witches. This book is so beautiful. For a long time, you're reading it and you forget that you're reading a horror because there's no horror element. There's suspense, there's that eerie feeling, but it takes a really long time for the witchiness to arrive. This is really essentially just a story about girls. It's a story about girls being powerless and finding power and realizing that power comes with a price. Can they pay it? Are they willing to pay it? What happens if they don't? What happens if they do? Are contracts binding? And they're all pregnant. These are young girls. They're all pregnant and they're all locked away. There's a lot of activity outside. They're all pregnant. They're all locked away in this old Southern mansion that's fallen apart, that's pretty derelict. It's the 1960s, early 70s. Things are going to go down. It is such a great book. It's such great storytelling. It's phenomenal writing. I now know, I always knew that Grady Hendrix was the horror writer for me because he gets it. He gets what I want. And that is a horror that is a commentary on being a human. So the actual demons, vampires, ghosts, witches, they're physical representations of the fears that we all have inside, of the things, the obstacles that we all face. In my opinion, horror should not be simply to disgust or cause dread. It is to help you name and face the things that terrify you. They're object lessons. Horror should be an object lesson. If it's really good, it also really scares you. But you should be able to walk away from it and have a deep conversation. That's what I think horror should be. And Grady Hendrix gets that. And also he sets his books in times that I enjoy reading about, often because I've lived in them. So I really enjoy the nostalgia aspect. He's got a really wonderful formula. He's got nostalgia, he's got fear factor, and he's got the possibility of really kind of figuring out the layers. And I absolutely love what he does, and I've always loved what he does. And I now know after reading this that even if he wrote just a straight up literary fiction novel, I would read it and love it because he is such a skillful writer. There's not a word that is unnecessary in this book. There's not a moment that is unnecessary in this book. There's not a point where I thought, okay, let's just get past this in this book. There is the building of beautiful suspense, the payoff of that suspense. The horror aspects are what you want them to be, and they never cross that line into absurdity. Sometimes he goes into absurdity because that's what horror does. It doesn't. This is a beautiful book. And again, this may be my favorite read of the year. Trigger warnings for a million things in there though. So look it up before you read if you know that you have some things you don't want to read about. Look it up. I then read another mystery novel with a detective, but she is unlike any detective I've ever seen before, and I've never seen a mystery novel written in this way. I felt so attuned to the way she approaches a mystery because it is the way that I approach figuring out my students and how I will teach. I felt seen in reading this book. That was Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear. I tabbed some stuff in here because there are some spots in here, and I guarantee you everything that I tabbed was were quotes from her old teacher, because he was putting into words, he was articulating the processes that I genuinely go through and have always gone through in being in my classroom space. And I was like, he's doing this. He's using this to solve mysteries. He's teaching her how to solve mysteries, like the mysteries that are going on inside of her with her own grief, and also the mysteries that she's trying to solve that are all around her. And it's like religion. I loved it. It's meditation. I loved it. And they are the processes that I have always gone through, and he's articulating them. And I was like, oh my goodness, I love this. I love this. And I can see the influences I know that are on me, like, from the cultures and things that I've been in, and the vast array of teachers from a wide variety of school systems around the world, and the things that I've gathered together from these places. I know my influences, and I can see them in his instruction to Maisie through her memories. But it's still beautifully articulated in a way that I never would have been able to do so. And I just absolutely was drawn into that. I love the way this story is told. So it starts out, and when I was reading it, I was like, I'm going to read this, and it's okay. And it's going to be okay. And I'm not going to continue in the series, because it starts out feeling very much like any other detective mystery series, but it's not. Not in any way, shape, or form. It's so psychological, and the mystery takes you places that you don't initially think it's going to go. And again, just like with Still Life, I reached a point in this book where kind of the red herring that the author is giving you for what the mystery is, I realized it was a red herring. It's pretty early on, it's first fourth of the book, that I realized it's this red herring. And from that moment forward, I was like, okay, where are you going to take me? Where are you taking me? What ride are we actually going on? Because then we go way back into the past, where we're learning all about Maisie Dobbs and how she got to be where she is, and her own stories, her own mysteries, her own losses, her own griefs, her own despairs, her own triumphs and joys, the people who support her and the people that she's lost, and the impact that things have had on her, that social situations and historical situations have had on her, making her who she is, getting her to the point where she is this detective person, this psychological detective. And then we pick up the mystery again in the present day, and it just goes such a wild direction. I didn't even try to figure it out. I was genuinely just along for the ride and having such a great time. I want to know more about Maisie Dobbs. I want to watch her do more mysteries. I want to hear more wisdom from her teacher. This book has just opened up a whole new world for me. And I loved it. I read so many books I loved this month. I revisited this. I haven't read this since I was a teenager, and I didn't know if I was going to love it. I remember loving it, but also not really having access to the rest of them. So I only read the first two, I think, and I really remembered this one. And I knew that I wanted to go back to it. It's one of those books where, you know, when you're a kid and you have limited funds, I think I've said this somewhere else. You're a kid and you have limited funds, and you're like, when I grow up, I'm going to do this. Well, this is one of my things. When I grow up, I'm going to own that whole series. I'm going to read that whole series, and I'm going to really love it. Well, I'm a very different person than I was back then, and I didn't know if I was going to love it. For one thing, kind of over World War II, like straight up World War II Holocaust novels. I've read so many, hundreds and hundreds. It's really important that they're out there. I'm really glad they keep being produced for new generations and people coming to these stories anew. I'm really happy even now to read memoirs, true stories. And I've written curriculum about it for students, for middle school students. And when I have the opportunity, I always, create some sort of throughway path to try to get them to Holocaust memorial centers, and it's very important history, and I never forget. Never forget. Also, kind of done with reading fiction about it because I've been oversaturated. I get excited when I find fiction that's a little bit different, that includes the Holocaust or World War II in general. So much of it is the same story over and over, which if it's the first time you've come to it in that form, it's not the same story over and over for you. But I'm not kidding when I say since I was like 12 till now, I've probably read 400 or 500 different books, memoir, biography, history about the topic. So, I didn't know if I was going to love this, but I really wanted to give it a chance because I remembered it so fondly. It did not disappoint. There's no audio for this, and it's quite chunky, and I love that there's no audio because I probably would have put on audio. I probably would have listened to it while I was doing the dishes, walking around, and I probably would have missed the beauty in this writing, the complexity and the depth in the writing. The storytelling is superb. The pacing is painful. It's meant to be. It's meant to be painful because it's going to sustain us through. This is a slow build, and it's going to sustain us through. I think there are 24 or 25 books total dealing with the Zion series. There's a lot that this series covers. But I would have missed if I was listening to it because I would have done it quickly and I would have done it distractedly. I would have missed just how well written this book is. It's so well written. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to read it. It's about a Jewish woman who is in an orchestra. It's about a violin. It is about the early years before the war has started, the early years of pogroms and of laws and restrictions. So really beautiful writing, really hard topic, so well done. I'm invested. I'm looking forward to reading this entire series. I kept my word. I'm so excited. And I restarted reading Witch Hat Atelier. In order to read number 5, I tried to dive straight in, but I realized it's been 2 years since I read the first 4 books in the series. Loved them, knew I loved them, wanted to get back to this, couldn't get back to it, couldn't find the motivation to pick up manga. I don't read a lot of manga. But the series that I really enjoy, Enter Witch Hat Atelier. And I want to finish the series. So I made a goal for myself to do that. I picked this up to try to read it thinking, oh, this will be a quick read one evening. And it was like, I have no idea what's going on. No clue. They're having some sort of trial. They're stuck somewhere. I don't know what's going on. And so I had to go back and reread the first 4 books in this series. I'm not counting them. I'm not counting them as books I read this month. But I did read 5 of these this month and was totally pulled back into this world, and I'm excited to each month read a next one until they're done. And then I have another manga series that I want to pick up again and start over and get through all the way to the end. When I am reading manga, I realize I really enjoy the process of reading manga. When I think about reading manga, I think, no, I don't want to. But when I actually do it, I love it. So maybe that's you too. I don't know. I can't tell you about, what can I tell you about Witch Hat Atelier? I can't tell you anything about this one because by the time we get here, so much has happened. It starts out in the first book, if you're not familiar with it, it starts out in the first book with a girl accidentally turning her mother to stone because she doesn't know that she has witchcraft powers. Witchcraft is kind of done through pen and ink and drawing in this world, and she is kind of tricked into writing a spell that turns her mother to stone, and then she gets taken to like this small, very small, not Hogwarts size, but like very small school for witches where she's kind of learning who she is and who they are and how the universe actually works, which she didn't really understand with her limited like just human view. And all this while she's really a little girl trying to get back to her mom or trying to deal with the grief of what she's done to her mom by accident. I then read Another book in a new favorite series of mine. I had never read the series. It's a fairly new series. For a long time, I kind of veered away from Christian fiction because it was so poorly written. Most of it is so poorly written. You can argue with me about that, but I've got reasons. I've got proofs. And I kind of just veered away from it for a very long time. It's something I almost exclusively read classics and Christian fiction in my teen years and college years. Undergraduate years. And then when I moved to India, I started reading classics and contemporary works, more modern work, and really enjoyed that. And then when I went back into my master's degree and knew that maybe I wanted to teach high school English, I started reading more widely and never looked back, never went back to Christian fiction. In the last year and a half or so, I have really, you want to know who did it? You want to know who did it? This author, single-handedly, Laura France. I haven't read this one yet, but this author single-handedly changed how I felt about the possibility of Christian fiction. I realized that Christian fiction has really kind of changed in the last few years. You still have those authors that are not doing a very good job, but producing just so many books in a year. I'm sorry, if you're an author and you're writing 10 to 15 books in a year, it's not quality work. It's not quality work. I don't care how good you are. And I just didn't want to waste my precious reading time on stories that were only going to partially satisfy, because I really love craft. I really do. I know I read a lot of genre fiction, but I read a lot of well-written genre fiction. And I realized that there are Christian authors out there that write beautifully, that are historically accurate, that pay attention to character development. And can write a really beautiful sentence. And I was like, okay, this is quality writing and I'm going to read it. And so I've been on the lookout for Christian fiction authors that really, really write well. And I've found so many, and I've just found another one. Gabrielle Meyer. I don't know about anything else she's written. This is the first thing I've read by her, but wow, this was a great story. It's such a unique plot. Now, her writing is not great, but her plotting and storytelling is superb. Why do I say her writing is not great? I don't feel like she quite trusts the reader to pick up on the Easter eggs that she's leaving. And I also, we probably could have lost about 50 pages of this book if she had just stopped having the main character tell us over and over again the process of her existence, which is when she goes to sleep, she wakes up in the opposite life. She's living two lives in two different time periods and two different bodies with two different identities. And when she turns 21, she has to choose the one she will remain in. And things happen in both lives. She's a fully, she's 21 years. That's a long time to be in a life. So she's got a family in each life. She's got problems in each life. She's got a love interest in each life. And one, she has a husband. She's got kind of put into a forced marriage. She's got stuff going on in each life, and she's got to make a decision. And if she would just not tell us every single day of this book, this story, we would have saved so much time. But it was like the author didn't trust us to know the first or second time. Sure, repetition can be important for your reader for understanding, but also your reader's not stupid. Please, please, please just get on with the telling of the story. So it's not great writing. When she's not doing that, though, her dialogue is superb. And her history is really well told. Her settings are beautifully developed. And there's so many characters in this because you've essentially got two main characters who are the same main character who are kind of living two different lives. They have different ways of speaking. They have different not interests necessarily, but ways of pursuing their interests or of embodying their interests. of interacting with people. They have two different families. They have two different worlds going on simultaneously, one at a time. And it's never hard to follow. It's never hard to follow. All of the characters are so beautifully developed, and you are so invested in this main character. You are so deeply invested. And there were so many times, especially near the end, when I was like, I don't know how this is going to work out for this character. I can't imagine a way that will work out for this character that will maintain the integrity of the character, not the character's integrity. Like she's always a person of integrity, but like the integrity of the development of the character. And when I tell you that the reveal literally had me sobbing with my mouth hanging open, it is an understatement. I adored the ride. I adored the ride with this book. Again, it is such a unique premise and so well done, with the exception of the author not really trusting that their reader is intelligent enough to remember some very important information about the main character. Other than that, it's a thing of beauty. And I am hoping to continue reading. I have the second book on my February TBR, and I'm hoping to continue reading. I do think that the second book may be the next generation. They may all be the next generation. And if that's the case, I probably will enjoy all of them. But I'm so invested in that character's life that to think of picking up a book that is about a totally different character and becoming that invested in a second character's life through the 5 or 6 books that exist in the series, it just feels emotionally terrifying. Actually emotionally terrifying to think that I will become that invested in all of these books. Where the Library Hides was my first DNF of the year. I am reading with Book Mama. I'm doing her challenge this year, and I'm in the Discord. I didn't say much in the Discord because I was really not liking my time with this. Every time I would pick it up, I mean, I tried from day 1 of January on until, I don't know when I gave up on it, maybe the 20th or so, 25th. I gave it a really good go, and every time I picked this up, I just hated reading it. I wanted to be doing anything other than read it, and I could feel myself kind of falling away from being willing to continue reading, wanting to just maybe just watch TV. I watched the entire series of Younger this month, and mostly because I was avoiding this book. So, yeah, I didn't like it. I don't know that I'll never pick it up. It is the second in a duology. I did read the entirety of the first one, and I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. And I wanted, when I finished that book, to know what happened next, and I just don't care right now. So, I'm going to keep it on my shelf. I'm going to put it back on my TBR, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't know if it'll be next year, but we'll see what happens. I followed it up, unfortunately, with a book that I should have DNF'd, but didn't, because I just kept thinking, there's a point to all of this, right? No. The Favorite by Lane Fargo. So first of all, let me say that I thought this was going to be a literary romance, like a literary fiction romance about figure skaters. I, in my head, always think figure skating is somehow going to be like the cutting edge. And so let me say that that's not fair. But at the same time, this is not a romance. This is a thriller, maybe? Like a social thriller. I hated it. I hated it. I hated being in these people's heads. I hated all of the little, like there's little breaks in between each chapter, which are basically just like the gossip rags, or podcasters talking about them. I hated the gossip aspect. I hated just the constant, the pacing, like nothing, like, oh, so many things happen in this book to these people, and it's just thing after thing after thing after thing. You never have a chance to breathe. I don't want that from my books. I really don't. I want appropriate pacing. I want things to happen, but I don't want them to be so mean-spirited. This was mean-spirited. This book was mean-spirited. And obviously, one of my favorite books of the year is about to be, possibly one of my favorite books of the year is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. This is a terrifying book. There is meanness in it. There is terror in it. There is darkness in it. I am not opposed to darkness in my books, but this was just mean for the sake of being mean. And I just kept thinking something good is going to come out of this in the end. And I was wrong. I was so wrong. And this was a 2-star read. Normally I would have DNF'd this. So I will say it's probably very well written because I didn't DNF it. I read it fairly quickly. I mean, the pacing, you can't not read it quickly. It's almost mind-boggling, the amount of things that happen in this book. And I hated every second of my time with it, and I didn't like it. So, 2-star read. This will be going in a little free library as soon as I can get it there. I followed that up with an audiobook I got from the library. This wasn't on my TBR, but my sister wanted me to read it, and so I did. Well, she suggested that I read it, or she talked it up, and I decided to read it. I don't know. This was a memoir. This was Sherry Franke's memoir, The House of My Mother. Now, she's a very good writer. This woman is a very good writer. And I don't have a physical copy of it, so I'll put a picture of it here. And I did just listen to it like I do with most memoirs. But she is a person who I had no idea who she was. I didn't know anything about her mother's story or anything. That was totally off my radar. I am aware of other situations, in fact, situations that were mentioned in the book of child abuse and kind of the belief systems that were maybe starting to infiltrate into her mother's life. But I didn't know, and I'm not going to say her name, but I didn't know the woman or her YouTube channel or any of that. Reading the story really told me the story, which I think most of you probably already knew. So, heartbreaking memoir. It is heartbreaking what people will do to each other. It is heartbreaking how much damage broken people can do. But Sherry is a beautiful writer, and she has made meaning out of it for herself and her siblings and her father, and through the writing of this book. And they are working on taking their experience and turning it into something good and impactful for themselves and for others. And I think that it's a very hopeful book. It's not too graphic, and I really appreciated that because I could also sense as she was writing it, she was thinking, well, my younger siblings are going to read this too, right? So she's very honest, but she's not unnecessarily graphic. And it was it's a thing of beauty as far as a memoir of trauma goes. She found a really beautiful balance, and I'm a big fan of hers now. And she's leaving social media, which I think is the greatest thing that she could possibly do, having grown up on social media. And she's doing her own life. And I strongly recommend this memoir if you enjoy true life memoirs and true crime and all of that stuff. It's not focused on the crime. It's focused on her. It's focused on overcoming. It's focused on what you do with the trauma. And it's not full of people who didn't see things coming. It's full of people who really tried, but it was hard because it was hard to pin down what was actually happening. But the evidence is there, and the evidence is clear, and an appropriate sentencing was done, and, crimes are being paid for, but damage has been done. And what do you do? What do you do when damage has been done? So really, really beautiful. Loved it. I followed that up with a book that I just tabbed within an inch of its life because it's so full of wisdom, as is everything that Madeleine L'Engle writes. This was the first book in the Crosswicks Journal series, book 1, A Circle of Quiet. by Madeleine L'Engle. Over the course of the year, I will be reading a Madeleine L'Engle, at least one a month. Next month in February, it's February already. Oh my goodness. In February, I'm reading 2 because I will be reading A Wrinkle in Time, and the Books Love Everyone book club pick is by Madeleine L'Engle. So I'll also be reading the love letters by her in February. And then I think in April is when I pick up the second book in this 4-book series of journals. But this is just so full of wisdom, and I just adore Madeleine L'Engle so much. Some things, some terminology in here didn't age well, but it's just the terminology, the heart and the intention and the information is spot on and beautiful. She talks a lot in here about education. She talks a lot in here about humanity. She talks a lot in here about being a woman and a mother. She talks a lot in here just about what it's like to be alive in the world, and it's full of wisdom and it's full of insight, and it's slow and comforting and thought-provoking and intelligent, and I loved it. I finally read The 13th Child. This was a hard one for me to get into, but once I was in, I could not stop. I actually tried to read this back in December. I got it in December. It would have been a great book for December, but I couldn't get into it then. This is a standalone YA novel that is more than a YA novel. It starts with the childhood of the main character and takes her all the way through to old age, which is not something that you normally find in a book of this length in a single standalone book. And yet it's done so beautifully. She's the 13th child, and so she is given to the gods, but this family is struggling. They give several of their kids to different gods. And she ends up being claimed by death, by the angel of death, or the god of death. And he has a plan for her life. She, until the age of 12, she lives with her family, and she doesn't, even though he's claimed her, and she doesn't really have a great life. Her parents are poor and abusive and rough. It's a rough, rough life. Plus, she's the 13th child, and so she gets the least. She's the youngest, so she gets the least, And on her 12th birthday, death comes to claim her. Not to kill her, but to claim her. And he's got a plan for her life. She's going to become the greatest healer. The catch is that one of her tasks as a healer is that she helps people in whatever state they're in. So if they are not going to survive, if there's no way that she can heal them, she has to help them die. And the way that that plays out in the story can be quite difficult to read. The situations and the circumstances under which she needs to help some people die is really harrowing. Which is why I say it's more than a YA novel. I don't know that I would put this in the hands of my students without discussion. To just give it to them and have them read it, I think would be really rough. But this is a beautiful love story. This is a beautiful, she doesn't fall in love with death. It's not that kind of story, but he truly is her godfather. I really liked, I've heard some people complain about the tone she takes with a god, and I think that the tone is totally appropriate. She argues back with him. She questions his choices. She wonders where he is when he disappears. Where are you, God? Like, how many people ask God that all the time? Like, these things are happening. Where are you? And, at a certain point, she kind of tells him, like, there's no place for you in my life anymore because of the way that you move is so differently from the way that I move. The way that I understand you and understand the world is so different from the way I'm experiencing the world. And he kind of respects that and takes a step back and lets her do her own thing, but he never leaves her. He never leaves her. He loves her, but he is entirely other than her. And I just think that for a faith journey that's told as a fairy tale, it's really accurate. It's really accurate for a faith journey. I think this book has a whole lot more to it than readers are giving it credit for. And I really, really loved it. Yes, it took me a little bit of time to get into it, but once I realized what it was doing and where it was going, I could not stop. So I think the first fourth of it took me 2 months to read, and the last 3/4 took me one afternoon. So loved this, absolutely loved this. I'd never read anything else by Erin A. Craig, but I'm curious now how I would feel about her other work. We're almost done. I read When Books Went to War by Molly Guptill Manning, and this was a quick afternoon listen. I didn't read it with my own 2 eyes, even though I have a copy of it. I listened to it while I was doing some other things around the house, and this is just what it says it is. It's the story of the importance of novels and storytelling in morale and education and social reform, and how books were used as a weapon, really, in a lot of ways during World War II that we aren't really aware of. It's a fascinating history book. And of course, if you love story and you love books, it's like a hero's journey of the story of the novel. And it's also fascinating what books, like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, that survived into, becoming classics. They could have just been they could have disappeared, but because they were part of this program, this Books Going to War program, they survived and the test of time. And there are a lot of books like that we may have lost to time that really continue to resonate because they were such a big part of that program. All right, here we go. We're down to the book group reads and the monthly reads. So I read 1 chapter in this. There's a standalone video for this. I'm going to read 2 more chapters in February. If you're reading along, that's awesome. I think I'm going to try and figure out a way, because I have a couple people reading with me who really want to discuss each month. So I'm going to try and figure out either like Discord or someone suggested Voxer. I haven't looked into it yet, but maybe Voxer, a way that we can just kind of chat about what we're reading in this book that's convenient. And then just this morning, we had our first Zoom discussion. Only a couple people showed up to the Zoom discussion, but it was so beautiful. It was so lovely to just talk about books that you love with people who also enjoyed reading them. Even if one of the 2 books that you read for your book group, nobody liked. I know of one person who really enjoyed this. I didn't get a chance to talk about it with her yet, but I know she really loved it. She said there was so much to mull over in it, and she was really impacted. It's slipping. She was really impacted by her read of it, and I want to know more. Most people felt that there was maybe, I verbalized it this way, and people in the Zoom conversation agreed with me. We'll be doing more about these books in a dedicated wrap-up video, which will come out next week, if everything goes according to plan. But I will just say that a lot of people felt like there was maybe an emotional disconnect. I verbalized it that way, and people seemed to agree. So I'm going to say there's an emotional disconnect here that maybe doesn't feel comfortable for, I guess, the majority of readers. And then there is Jane Eyre, and I'm going to save all my thoughts on Jane Eyre and the rest of my thoughts on Praying with Jane Eyre for that dedicated wrap-up video. There we go. Somehow, I have to, in February, make myself record my response to books at the end of every reading. I have to do it. It's such a better way to do a wrap-up video than a sit-down wrap-up video. But if you watched this whole thing, thank you so much. I read just wonderful books the sun is coming out. I read just wonderful books this month. It was the best start to a reading year that I could possibly have hoped for. And I'm hopeful that the rest of the year will feel the same. This is long, so I'm just going to say it. Let's go read.